Hi everyone, I'm Brianna and welcome to Roll Initiative. Today we're going to be talking about combat, and we're going to start off looking at some tips and tricks for normal combat encounters, and later in the video we're going to be talking about some tips and tricks for running combat with the big bad evil guy. So make sure to keep watching and let's get started. So what we're going to start with is actually the behavior of the enemies, and I think this is a pretty big one to make combat more accurate or believable. And to start off with that is when you start combat. When you run into the enemies, sometimes it can be a good idea to throw in some dialogue before you start combat, even if it's just the enemies taunting the players. Then it doesn't feel like the players are just being thrown into combat. They might have a chance to talk to the monsters or NPCs before getting attacked. This way, it feels like they've got more options and they get to choose what they do instead of just being thrown headfirst into combat. And depending on what you use as dialogue, then your players might actually be able to get a hint about what the creature wants. Like if a goblin jumped out at them, yelling about them to get out of its house, then your players might be able to stop it and convince it that they're not here to intrude, that they're just passing by. And they might even be able to bargain with it so it will let them pass. And these can sometimes turn out to be pretty fun social interactions, and your players might feel pretty clever for avoiding combat. Naturally, this won't work with every group, but I think it's pretty neat, and I thought if there's anyone else who thinks that, then it's worth sharing. Adding some sort of obstacle or challenge to combat can make it really interesting and take it away from just trying to deal as much damage as you can every turn. And this can be practically anything and can go many ways. Whether it's some sort of puzzle that they have to finish to stop the combat, such as they're being attacked by some sort of magical animated objects, such as suits of armor, and they need to complete some sort of puzzle to stop it while trying to keep it back. Or you could do something where you have to protect someone. Maybe there's a prisoner and you have to protect them from the enemies during combat. That can encourage players to be creative because they're not just trying to deal as much damage as possible. They're trying to accomplish something else, such as keeping monsters away from an NPC. Some creatures have an intelligence score of 1, and those are not the type of creatures that are going to be relevant right here. Because sometimes it can be hard to remember that creatures in D&D, even though they are enemies and monsters, have wants. Whether their want is food or their want is to protect their territory, you need to consider how much they want that. Because most creatures that don't have an intelligence score of 1 aren't going to fight till they die. Unless it's something really important, a lot of creatures are going to try and run away before that happens. And that's something to keep in mind. You don't have to run combat till all the enemies are dead. They can run away when they're getting low on HP. Not only can this stop combat from dragging out, but it seems more realistic. Fighting the BBEG is often the climax of the story, what everything has led up to, defeating the big bad evil guy and saving everyone. But sometimes it doesn't really go to plan. Sometimes your players absolutely mop the floor with this big bad villain who is supposed to be really tough because your party has had really good rolls, or maybe you've just had some really bad ones. Or maybe something went wrong balancing the encounter. Anyway, I have a few ideas on what to do when this sort of thing happens. So now we're going to have a look at some of those. A really simple way to turn things around when your players are mopping the floor with the big bad is for the big bad to call in backup. it can just be small minions, but they'll be dealing the players damage each round. So the players will probably attack them to thin them out so that they can focus back on the big bad. This can make it last a little bit longer and can give the big bad a few more rounds to live. Of course, this can't be just used anywhere. There has to be a reason why minions are coming. And maybe you can even hint to your players that the boss is calling for help. That way they aren't taken by surprise. Something else that's really good to keep in mind is action economy. So if you only have one enemy, which is your big bad, and the more players you have, then the more damage they're going to be dealing to the boss every time he gets to deal one lot of damage. So there are a few things that I think are important for a boss that's fighting all by itself. And that is for it to be able to have multi-attack or some sort of other bonus attack. And there's also a bit of a homebrew rule that I really like, which is counterattack. When a player tries to attack the boss, but rolls a nat 1, then the boss will be able to attack that player instead. But if you're already in the middle of combat, the boss is dying, and none of these other things really suit, then you can always do some sort of video game type thing where the boss becomes more powerful as it gets on lower health, in which case it might get a new ability, or it can always go into a second phase where it becomes more powerful. The main thing you want to keep in mind here is that 1, you're not trying to kill your players. You just want the boss to be a challenge. You don't actually want to make it come back too powerful and accidentally TPK your party. The other thing is that sometimes it can be fun to just let your players have an easy win. Sometimes that will be a lot more fun to them than a really challenging encounter. So try and pick your timing. Sometimes really challenging combat encounters are amazing, but sometimes an easy win is just nice. Though, as a last bit of advice, I am going to give you a warning. Don't mess with the boss's HP. Don't cross it out and decide that the boss will live until it has been exciting enough, and don't double it or decide it has a lot more than what it had. Unless it's a mistake that you made, such as not balancing the encounter right, or it's a homebrew creature that you made, unless it's your mistake, don't touch its HP. There are a lot of better ways to deal with this. In fact, I have a video entirely about this, which I'll put up at the end of this one. So if you're interested in other things you can do, check it out. But there we go, that's the end of this video, and thank you so much for watching all of this way. And if you enjoyed it, I would be so grateful if you'd consider giving it a like, or maybe even subscribing to my channel. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.